Okay, good morning and
Hi,
welcome
Steve.
to,
Mary Salas.
good morning, Mary Salas.
How you doing?
I'm pretty good. I want to welcome you all to the September 18th Special Sandag Board of Directors meeting. If you will, please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
The flag
of the
of the
United
United
States of
States
America
of America.
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you all. Next, I want to ask our clerk, Francesca, to confirm that we have a quorum.
Chair Voss, we do have a quorum at this time.
Thank you. With that, let's start with item number one, public and member comment. Members of the public who wish to offer public comment not related to the matter on today's agenda, please raise your hand if you're using Zoom or press *9 on the telephone and we will recognize you. Francesca, do we have any public comment?
I see no public comment at this time, but you do have a member raised hand.
All right, member comment, please. Who would that be?
My apologies. It looks like it's Francesca with her hand raised. There's no public comment.
So no public or no member comment? Great.
Correct, sir.
Let's move on to item number two, which is the focus of this meeting. I appreciate you all clearing your schedules to participate in this meeting today. As chairman, along with the vice chair, we felt it was essential. The work of Sandag is important to our county. The San Diego region needs a well-planned transportation network, one that meets the needs of the entire county. As for this item, the auditor's report, it's a little bit like deja vu all over again for me. In 2016, I was the board member who called for investigation of the prior leadership team following the revelations that laid bare the lack of candor and accountability in the agency. I co-chaired the investigative committee. That's not at all to say that I view the current issues as comparable. They are not. But the need for transparency and accountability is the same. That's why I called this meeting. And when I called it, I made it clear I wanted all documents in unredacted form made publicly available. They were published on our website, though not near as quickly as they should have been, but for everyone to be able to see them. I wanted the public to have the full record so they can make their own judgments. So now everyone has the same information with no manipulations, no redactions. So that entire debate on redactions and manipulation is over. It's time to focus on the facts, focus on what's actually in the audit, what our next step should be. Today, we're going to hear from the auditor, Sandag Management, and the Sandag Audit Committee, and the independent employment law firm it retained. Then we're going to take public comment and then hear from the board. I trust that when all is said and done, we're going to come together and chart a path forward, a path that's going to allow us to regain the public trust and refocus on delivering the best transportation plan possible for the entire county. So with that, we will hear first from the independent auditor, Mary Kashmashrab. Mary, thank you for joining us this morning. I hand it over to you.
Thank you, Steve. Good morning, Chair Voss, Vice Chair Blaisbear, and members of the board. Today, we're going to discuss the audit, the findings and the recommendations, and move through them. I'm going to have my auditor charge, I'll let actually walk through the findings and the recommendations, and then I'll close in a final discussion that represents the Office of the Independent Performance Auditor. So with that, Michelle Ludwig, would you please begin?
Yes, thank you, Mary. And thank you, Chair and members of the board. Today we're presenting a summary of the Salaries and Compensation Performance and Compliance Audit. If we could get those slides brought up. Can you see the slides?
Yes.
Okay, great. So, since this is our first audit presentation, we want to share a couple accountability and transparency of government programs through objective analysis of information in order to help create a better future. The OIPA followed government auditing standards, which are also known as Generally Accepted Governmental Auditing Standards, or Yellow Book, to complete the audit. On the next slide, we cover the steps of the audit process. There's 4 steps. In the planning phase, auditors gain an understanding of the environment and learn the criteria that applies. In the fieldwork phase, auditors review supporting documentation and perform analysis to evaluate programs and processes and reach conclusions. In the reporting phase, auditors create a draft report, receive responses and additional information from management, and then create a finalized report. And in the recommendation phase, auditors track the status of recommendations. On the next slide, what's in a finding? That goes over the 5 components of a finding, which include condition, criteria, cause, effect, and recommendation. And recommendations are designed to address the condition and the causes identified. Moving forward to the background and overview, the audit committee approved this audit as part of the audit plan. The objectives of the audit were to evaluate pay scales for competitive talent, ensure a good system of controls is in place, determine compliance with laws and regulations, and review compensation such as bonuses. On the next slide, we want to thank all those that participated in the audit and the agency-wide risk assessment. Though the audit process is not always comfortable, it presents a unique opportunity for those responsible for governance, management, and staff to reflect on what they're doing right and where improvements may be needed. It is in this spirit that the OIPA would like to acknowledge its commitment to working with SANDAG management and staff now and in the future to improve business processes. Moving forward.
Michelle, I think you're off one slide.
Oh, am I? I can't see the slides on my screen. We should be on slide 7. Can you see those, Mary?
Yes, so we're starting off at SANDAG's salary and compensation.
We should be on the with slide 7, and it says the audit of SANDAG salaries and compensation has never been performed before.
That's correct. We're on track now. So if we could just make sure that you clearly say next slide, Michelle, so they hear us.
Of course.
Thank you.
In fiscal year 2019, SANDAG had 390 full-time and 33 temporary employees, for which approximately $36 million was allocated to salaries and $17 million was allocated to benefits. And in fiscal year 2021, the overall number of employees was reduced by about 40 positions. Next slide. So in summary, the audit found significant weaknesses in SANDAG's governance and internal controls. SANDAG is missing key policies and procedures to ensure compliance with laws, regulations, and best practices. And also, the previous internal audit function was not designed to ensure issues that were identified were reported to the audit committee and the board of directors. The audit scope was limited by data integrity issues, which were found within key human resource and payroll systems. The OIPA found that the report from Ceridian system contained errors and missing information, and the data did not reconcile to SANDAG's integrated master budget model, which is used to develop SANDAG's budget. As a result, our testing was impacted. Next slide, please. The report contained 10 findings and 37 recommendations designed to address the issues that were identified during the audit. And next, we're briefly going to go over the audit highlights and the recommendations. Next slide. Finding 1 addresses governance. Specifically, the OIPA found that management is setting policy for key human resource functions or administrative policy, and the board did not oversee or approve those policies. The board was not informed of its legal responsibility to develop and approve the policies by management or council as required by AB 805 Section 15, which amended the PUC code to read in part that the board shall or must develop and adopt an administrative policy. A detailed paper trail of approval and revisions of the administrative policies through the years is not available. And over time, board policy and bylaws became inconsistent and confusing as changes were made, and the OIPA found that the changes that were suggested to the board were not presented with impact statements to ensure a complete understanding. Consequently, a conflict of interest exists, and there is a risk that management can make changes to administrative policy and override established controls. Next slide, please. Recommendations to the board of directors include to assume ownership of and update the administrative policy, strengthen and amend board bylaws and policies, evaluate the retention of general counsel for the board to ensure the board is aware of its governance responsibilities and documents are retained, and require management to acknowledge and comply with board bylaws and policies upon hire and annually thereafter. Next slide, please. Finding 2 addresses severance payments. The OIPA found that 3 employees were paid approximately $338,000 in severance payments when they resigned from the Sandag board, when they resigned from Sandag without board approval or notification to the board. Sandag has no policy for severance, and the policy for termination pay states management should not pay more than 25% of an employee's sick leave balance upon resignation. Sandag was missing a detailed paper trail to explain why the payments were made and how management determined how much to pay the employees. Next slide, please. One at-will, the audit also found that one at-will employee was paid approximately $60,000 in severance when the employee resigned from the agency, though the employee's employment agreement stated that no severance payment was due if the employee resigned or was let go with cause. Justification of why the payment was made when it was not allowable under the terms of the employment agreement was missing. Next slide, please. The severance payments were made under threat of litigation and paid using salary savings. Threats of litigation or claims should be documented and validated under the purview of general counsel, and these types of payments would not be considered severance payments. The agreements signed by the resigned employees and the executive director, in which the employee waived past, current, and future claims against Sandag, were not signed by the Office of the General Counsel. Without a paper trail, it's not possible to evaluate if the claims against Sandag had merit or if the amounts paid were reasonable. Next slide, please. The takeaway is that because there is no board-approved policy for severance pay and a paper trail is not available, there's increased risk that the payments may be perceived as waste and abuse of public funds. The recommendations include investigate the legality of the payments and failure to report them to the full board, require management to develop procedures to ensure severance pay or termination pay is paid consistent with board policy, and develop a process to request board approval when severance pays are made that are not included in the board policy, and then require staff to attend training on the updated procedures. Next slide, please. Finding 3 addresses bonuses and salary increases to a former executive level employee. Over a 12-month period in 2018, the employee received approximately $112,000 in bonuses and salary increases. The full board was not made aware of the payments, and Sandag did not have sufficient support or basis to pay these payments. Next slide, please. The OIPA noted that none of the documents reviewed stated that the payments were made to compensate the employee for acting as the executive director. Recommendations include investigate the legality of failure to report them to the board, rescind the delegated authority to award performance pay until such time as sufficient controls are in place, and clarify the responsibility to report any actions taken on behalf of the board to the full board. Next slide, please. Finding 4 addresses fiduciary duty. Specifically, the OIPA found that the board has not defined special compensation as required by law, and the board is not aware of and has not approved the types of special compensation being paid to employees. Effects include that management benefits are not equitably paid to employees, and CalPERS does not allow reporting of special compensation paid to employees that hasn't been properly approved by the board, which can impact employee retirement benefits. Next slide, please. Another issue is that pay for performance information presented to the board is not transparent. This is also known as the annual compensation pool. Amounts presented do not clarify the amount that will go towards salaries or other costs, and no reconciliation is performed to determine the amounts that increased in salaries, CalPERS, workers' comp, or Medicare. Next slide, please. Management did not award performance pay as it was presented to the board, and there is no policy capping the percentage or amount of performance incentives that can be awarded to employees. Also, management did not inform the board of who receives performance pay or how much was paid. And finally, supporting documents do not summarize the performance pay by type of incentive. Next slide, please. Recommendations include to create and publish board policies to define special compensation and to address the nature and timing of information presented to the board in accordance with the laws and regulations. Also, require management to develop procedures for budgeting and reporting financial information in accordance with laws and regulations. Require management to update the methodology and procedures for determining the annual compensation pool amount to align by policies that are approved by the board. And require management to develop a procedure for reconciling performance incentives paid to amounts approved by the board. And finally, require staff to formalize procedures for understanding of their roles and responsibilities. And I might have said that wrong. Require staff to review the formalized procedures for understanding of their roles and responsibilities. Next slide, please. Finding 5 addresses weaknesses in financial controls. Specifically, in one case, the OIPA found that Sandag had overbilled a number of projects for a bonus. Approximately $58,000 was charged to the projects for fringe benefits and overhead in addition to the bonus. Reallocating funding meant for projects can result in decreased funding for ongoing and future projects. Next slide, please. Also, Sandag incorrectly reported employee bonuses to CalPERS. A report by CalPERS stated Sandag was unaware that the board could not delegate the approval of administrative policies to management. Incorrect reporting of bonuses to CalPERS increases the risk that employees' retirement benefits could be adversely impacted. And accounting staff paid severance payments without sufficient documentation. Without sufficient controls in place, there's increased risk that erroneous or even fraudulent payments could be processed. Next slide, please. Recommendations include to require financial services to create procedures to ensure financial information is accurate and reliable and information is correctly reported to CalPERS. Require financial services to review bonuses that have been reallocated to projects to identify and correct any amounts that are incorrectly charged to those projects. Require financial services to update accounting procedures to address issues identified within the report, and require staff to review policies and procedures to understand their roles and responsibilities. And finally, require employees to acknowledge their understanding of board policies 41 and 39 regarding their obligation to report fraud, waste, and abuse. Next slide, please. Finding 6 addresses disparities in Sandag's productivity incentive program. Documents show that merit increases, equity payments, and bonuses are not equitably paid to staff. Next slide, please. Also, performance incentives were not always justified by performance evaluations, and the executive director and/or senior leadership's approvals of the incentives was not documented. Recommendations include require management to develop and seek board approval of special compensation tables annually as required by the law. Require management to develop procedures to identify the performance ratings employees must obtain to receive those incentives. Require staff to review, finalize procedures, and finally, require financial services to develop procedures to reconcile the performance incentives that they pay to those that are approved by management. Next slide, please. Finding 7 addresses setting salary ranges. The OIPA found there was insufficient procedures and methodology for using comparable salary surveys and a lack of complete job duty statements. Recommendations include to establish policies and procedures for regularly completing salary comparison surveys, request management conduct a job analysis by gathering information about job duties, and then management should develop job duty statements. Next slide, please. In finding 8, this addresses the increased number of executive managers and salaries. A number of changes occurred as a result of the reorganization in 2019, which resulted in an increased size of the executive team, lack of sufficient supporting documentation for increased salary ranges for executive management, top-level managers receiving large salary increases, though their job duties were essentially unchanged, and newly promoted employees to director-level positions receiving large and unjustified salary increases. Next slide, please. Recommendations include update agency documentation to ensure consistency of employee names, job titles, and other information through all documents. Revert salaries for positions to the amounts prior to September 2019 salary schedule revision. Complete a needs assessment, including a cost bid analysis to determine whether the number of management positions is necessary and justified. And then based on that need assessment, management should complete a salary comparison survey to determine the market value of those positions. Next slide, please. 99 addresses non-competitive hiring practices. The OIPA found that SANDAG does not ensure positions are advertised and that candidates are competitively hired. Specifically, several management positions were filled by appointment, and SANDAG does not have procedures for openly advertising and competitively hiring employees. Recommendations include identifying employees that were appointed or promoted without undergoing a fair and competitive hiring process. And for the positions identified, determine if the position is necessary, and if so, vacate, re-advertise, and then follow a competitive hiring process to fill the position. And finally, develop procedures for advertising and competitively hiring positions in accordance with laws, regulations, and board policy. Next slide, please. Finding 10 addresses the use of at-will contracts. Specifically, SANDAG changed the status of regular full-time employees to at-will employee status without board oversight or approval. Under the change, employees hired on or after July 1st, 2019 into positions that were designated as regular would be considered at-will. As a result, some employees can be fired without cause and without the right to appeal, while SANDAG must find cause to terminate others. Consequently, there is a disparity among staff as certain individuals are assured a higher level of job security than their peers. Recommendations include to create and establish board policy, aligned with applicable laws and regulations, and to ensure employee rights are not violated and are consistent within the agency. This concludes the summary of salaries and compensation audit. Mary will now discuss the takeaways from the audit.
Thank you, Michelle. Great job. Next slide, please. The key takeaways from our audit is 1, promotions and salary increases reflected in the fiscal year 2021 budget are for promotions and salary increases that in fact did occur at the end of fiscal year 1920. Also, SANDAG should develop policies and procedures to clearly define the administrative and delegated authority of management. Next, SANDAG should develop procedures developed to ensure adherence to board policies and good systems of controls are in place. And last, SANDAG should ensure sufficient documentation exists for actions taken at the time actions were taken. Next slide, please. This office was created to bring more transparency to SANDAG and to provide that transparency to the public. If certain information is prohibited from public disclosure or is excluded from a report because of its confidential or sensitive nature, auditors should disclose it in the report that certain information has been omitted and in circumstances why those omissions were necessary. Employees' titles, salaries, compensations are not prohibited for disclosure or confidential in nature. And for information, this can be the Transparent California provides not just titles and dollar amounts, but actual employee names that are available to any public person. And that's because we are all public employees paid by public dollars. Next slide, please. I want to lastly share with you the difference between audits versus a legal opinion. Audits are unbiased and objective examinations of records, operations, and/or performance of organizations. Auditors verify the existence, the reliability, the accuracy, and the authorization of documents that existed at the time the audit took place. Auditors cannot rely on assumptions and must support their conclusions based on audit work that was performed. Legal opinions, on the other hand, are opinion letters that are formal expressions of judgment or advice based on an expert's special knowledge. When it refers to a document containing a lawyer's understanding of the law that applies to a particular case. And if facts are not supplied, assumptions must be included in the narration. Opinions are not based on a review of existence, reliability, or accuracy of information provided by an audit client. Disclaimers of release of experts from liability if their opinion is wrong is also often found in a legal opinion. Opinions expressed are not a guarantee of a particular outcome. It should be noted that the audit staff of OPA and myself as the IPA have previously performed complex audits of salaries and compensation, contracts and procurement, grant funding governance, timekeeping, fraud, waste, and abuse, and for more at all levels of state and local government. We have a combined years of experience of over 60 years. We have a thorough understanding of not just transportation, but of surely how control should exist around any process or procedure. With that being said, I will move forward, and I'm not sure how we're gonna handle this, Steve, if we're gonna open it up for questions or if we're gonna hear from management first. So I'll bring it back to you. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to thank all of the members of the Office of the Independent Performance Auditor, particularly Mary and Michelle for the presentation. We will hear all of the reports and then we will take public comment, and then we will hear board questions and comments. Next, I want to invite Sandag Management to present. Ray Trainer, take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. You know, it's not management's intent today to rehash earlier commentary. We're not here to plant a flag in the ground and challenge point by point the items in the audit that we disagree with. What you have before you is a comprehensive and thorough response from management, as well as the legal opinion of an independent legal counsel hired by your audit committee. Now, you may have listened to or read the very detailed presentation we provided at the recent audit committee meeting last Friday. We're not here to do battle, but rather to remain transparent, as we always have been. We're here to answer any remaining questions and to eliminate any doubt about management's actions and responsibilities. Now, we can understand some of the positions taken by the independent auditor's office. However, there are a few things we need to emphasize to ensure there's crystal clarity. First, I'm confident the board appreciates the importance and the necessity of entrusting management to administer this fine organization within the policies and the procedures that you establish. And we've done that. We also continue to count on your guidance and your direction. Now, we look forward to refining policies and procedures so there are no questions about the actions taken by management within its delegated authority. And we look forward to continuing the regular conversations between management and the board to carry out the important mission of Sandag for the benefit of all the region's residents. Next, from the carefully researched and carefully planned reorganization, Sandag's executive director has established an operational environment and a structure that's enabling this organization to accomplish even more success and to carry out the vision for San Diego's future transportation needs. And this reorganized organization is delivering. From the on-time, on-budget work on the Mid-Coast Trolley, the largest infrastructure project ever undertaken in our region and recognized by the Federal Transit Administration as a model project, to the development of a bold new vision for our transportation future, which challenges prior thinking and takes advantage of new trends and technologies. And more recently, our work to uncover and expose the inequity of the impacts to our communities resultant from the COVID-19 pandemic, and equipping you, the region's elected officials, with unprecedented levels of data and information to aid you in your decision-making. SANDAG is now structured and is operating even more effectively to serve the needs of every corner of our region. Third, SANDAG, like any public agency in California, is bound by laws that include protecting the privacy of employees in limited circumstances. Based on the advice of counsel, we did that during the review process for this audit. Everything was public and remains available for anyone to see. Nothing was held back. We are a transparent agency. And fourth, management went to great lengths to have some of these actions carefully reviewed. These actions were reviewed by counsel and by experts in organizational management. Great care went into making these decisions. They were developed and implemented based on the experience and expertise of many individuals, including the executive director. And they've recently been validated by an outside independent legal counsel hired by your audit committee. Management wouldn't change these decisions. You might ask why? Well, because they were done in the best interest of SANDAG and to better enable us to accomplish our mission and serve the public. What we're talking about here is making it better. We're talking about refinements to the process and ensuring continued transparency in a calm and a professional approach. We sincerely appreciate the Audit Committee's extensive efforts to review the draft audit, to clear up some misinformation, and to ensure conclusions are based on current rules and current policies. We need to ensure that the public maintains its trust in our operations going forward because we have so many projects to manage. We also need to ensure the record is accurate. As a public agency entrusted with spending public dollars, we know audits are necessary and valuable. It's important to recognize that SANDAG has been the subject of financial reviews, compliance reviews, and audits in prior years. As a public agency, our records and our procedures are available to the public. Now, whether it's SANDAG or any other public agency, there's also a responsibility from management to respond to audits. Management also has a fiscal responsibility, as well as a responsibility to ensure that we're an effective operation. A management response will often include its concurrence with recommendations. It may raise questions, and in some cases, we will offer facts and points of view in the areas that we disagree. But let's be clear. What seems to be getting lost in this charged environment of the past couple of weeks is that we have concurred, and we continue to concur with many of the recommendations. Our action plan to the board will spell out how we're implementing these recommendations. But obviously in this audit, there are a few remaining areas of serious disagreement. But management stands ready to work with the board to resolve these and for the board to provide the direction going forward. We appreciate the incredible amount of time spent by staff and by members of the audit committee and others to fully discuss and fully vet this audit, as well as this today. And we want you to know that we remain committed to working with you, the board, to carry out these initiatives and the responsibilities that you've entrusted to us. We're happy to respond to questions and to provide any additional input as you may request. In closing, we look forward to working with you, with your audit committee, and the entire board to refine and enhance the policies and the procedures that maintain and strengthen the public's trust in our organization. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ray. Now I'd like to call on the Chair of the Audit Committee, Councilmember Baber, to present your report.
Okay, how's my audio?
All good.
Okay, thank you. When I heard Ray, he mentioned the magic word that I'm going to follow, streamlined. And so we're going to cut this relatively short, but we will be ready for any questions. First, I'd like to thank the members of the Audit Committee who just put in countless hours and did just an amazing amount of work to bring us to this point. Elkhorn Mayor Bill Wells, Stuart Halpern, Paul Dostart, and Bob Monson. I'm really thankful for all of their work, and they did a great job. Second, I'd like to introduce Sandy McDonough, who sort of served as our inside counsel for the Audit Committee, and then I'll introduce Art Hartinger, who is our outside counsel. So, Sandy?
Good morning. I'm Sandy McDonough with Paul Clemens, Sullivan and Knotton, and I want to give a brief overview of the Audit Committee's role. SANDAG Board Policy number 39 establishes that role in assisting the Board of Directors in fulfilling its oversight responsibilities. Under Board Policy number 39, the Board has delegated to the Audit Committee the task of overseeing the work of the Office of the Independent Performance Auditor in preparing and issuing audit and investigative reports, and that's section 3.1.6. It's also delegated to the Audit Committee the role of approving the annual audit plan after discussion with the Office of the Independent Performance Auditor under section 3.1.7. Finally, the Audit Committee's responsibilities include oversight of the implementation of corrective action to address noted audit deficiencies under section 3.1.3.
Okay, next I'd like to introduce Art. And although Art did a legal analysis on 5 subjects, I think to streamline it, we're only going to focus on one, and it is the what's in the OIPA recommendation 2.1, formally investigate the legality of management's actions of granting severance pay to employees who resigned without pending litigation and the granting of the exception for paying more than 25% of sick leave to employees who voluntarily resigned from SANDAG. And I'm going to ask Art if he believes that he has done that and formally investigated the legality of that action.
Thank you. I'm Art Hartinger. I'm a partner with Rennie Public Law Group. I've been practicing for over 30 years in representing primarily local government. We were selected in part because we have no prior relationship with SANDAG, no prior relationship with the OIPA, the Audit Committee, et cetera. At the outset, we were instructed to be objective, and we were not to, have any sort of predetermined outcome. So we rendered 2 legal opinions, one dated August 31, 2020, the other September 10th, 2020. Both are on the website. The question for this brief presentation today is, were the severance payments made? There were 4 severance payments in question. Did these constitute some sort of unconstitutional gift of public funds? And the first question that looked at was, and there was some question raised, is SANDAG subject to the constitutional prohibition on giving public funds? And the answer is, we conclude yes, SANDAG is subject to that constitutional prohibition. And then you look at what were the circumstances of the payments. In the context of a severance payment, you look at, were these made for a valid public purpose? And there are authorities out there that describe the circumstances of a separation of employment. Is there some legal threat, legal claim, some justification that would justify the expenditure of public funds for getting in exchange, in terms of what happened here, a general release of all claims so that SANDAG is protected in the future from legal, some sort of legal action. I will say that I have negotiated numerous severance payments in maybe not exactly similar context, but very similar contexts, where an employee is essentially forced to resign, and then in exchange for that, they give a release and there's some payment made so that there's a handshake and everybody goes on. It's not uncommon in our world to do that. But again, under the law, there must be some colorable justification for that. The amount spent must be commensurate with the value, if you will, of the claim. So here, the auditors appear to suggest that there must be some formal claim actually filed. We believe that not to be accurate. There doesn't need to be a formal claim filed. And we relied in large part on a detailed memorandum provided by Sandra McDonough, describing the circumstances of each of the separations. 3 of the employees were subject to termination. There were independent analyses done for each that describes the risk to Sandag for those circumstances. With respect to the 4th employee, there were, again, circumstances suggesting that Sandag was potentially at risk for a claim. So we conclude under all of the circumstances that we observed that these payments were not unconstitutional gifts of public funds. They appeared to be made for a public purpose and were legitimate based upon the information provided to us. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Art. The audit committee went through each of the OIPA's findings, and we made our recommendations to the board, and they're in our paper report that all of you have, so I'll just put those in the record, and if I need to answer questions on any one of them, or if someone doesn't we can read them into the record, but I think that might be a waste of time right now. Just to say, there were 10 of them. On 6 of them, we hotly debated all of them, and on 6 of them, we made a recommendation to the Sandag board, but 4 of them we didn't because we couldn't reach agreement. And I thought everybody did their job, and we worked hard, and we made a recommendation to the board, and that a policy committee is supposed to do. So with that, I will pass it on back to the chair.
Thank you, Councilmember Baber. Appreciate you and your team. Mayor Bill Wells, Mr. Halpern, Mr. Monson, and Mr. Dostart. I know it was a lot of work. That concludes all the reports. We're now going to take public comment. If you'd like to speak, please go ahead and raise your hand or press *9 now so we can start to get a sense of how many comments we may have. Francesca, do we have folks queued up?
So far, I see no hands raised, Chair.
We'll give just another moment.
I do see one hand raised now, and they're starting to pop in. Stuart Halpern has raised his hand first.
Okay, Mr. Halpern, you're speaking as a member of the public or the audit committee?
I'm speaking as a member of the public. How much time do I have, Chair?
You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Voss. I'm Stuart Halpern, one of 3 public members of Sandag's audit committee. I've also served on the ITOC for near 7 years, during which time I annually chaired the ITOC Transnet Financial Audit and Compliance Subcommittee. I also serve on the audit committee of the City of San Diego. Suffice to say, I do this audit stuff a lot. Based on all that experience, my view is that the most important business here today is actually not the salary and compensation audit. The critical foundational business here today, as Chair Voss alluded to, is for this board to stand up for good governance and vote to prohibit the agency from ever again altering in any way any audit report. Why? Because this agency did something unprecedented in my many years of audit committee experience. For last Friday's audit committee meeting, it unilaterally and without consultation redacted information from the audit report of its independent performance auditor. They didn't even call the auditor ahead of time and say, hey, we have some issues with disclosing this or that, as you or I most likely would have done. No, They acted unilaterally. Were some redactions justified because of legal risk? Maybe, but they even redacted the auditor's legally obligated disclosure of allegations of attempted interference with the audit. You know, that reminds me of something I learned long ago in Sunday school, Proverbs 28:13. Whoever conceals his transgressions will not prosper, but he who confesses and forsakes them shall obtain mercy. So today this board has a choice. And by the way, this is not a pro-management or anti-management choice. If this board cares about the integrity and credibility of this agency, which I sure do, then you must vote to prohibit any future unilateral redactions or alterations of any kind of an audit report. Thank you.
Thank you, Stuart. Francesca, who do we have up next? And let's make sure to get the clock started on each speaker.
Thank you, Chair. I have Clive Richard next to speak.
Clive, good morning. Clive, go ahead.
Mood. I'm sorry. I'm learning how to do this. I've never done this before. Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
members
sir.
of the board, the members of this board, I am really, I guess the word is confused by why we're here. But I think the last speaker put a finger on where I think I am in terms of what's going on. If I sound confused, again, it's because I really am. But I think we're talking about an audit report that contain names or name a position or by strict personal name that was known publicly. It occurred. You walk into a room one day and you know there's someone not there. The chief deputy executive director, as I understand it, because it was revealed out of closed session into the press, that individual could now be the person who is being questioned about how you distribute severance pay. Let's see. What is the price you would pay someone who has acted in a position that they were offered that they could not, and then were told they could not have? What is the price that you would pay for acting in a position with, as well as could be done? What is the value? That is what I think is a big question here. Mr. Thank you. I'm going to stop here. Have a great.
Thank you, Clyde. Good to hear from you. Francesca, who do we have next?
Next, I have Kevin Byrne.
Mr. Burns, take it away.
Yes, my name is Kevin Byrne and I live up in Oceanside. And I'd like to address the matter at hand regarding the auditor's report and speak to the issues regarding the between management, the audit report, the audit committee, and the board of directors. My information comes from attending the audit committee meeting and the documentation attached to the agenda. It was stated in the final report of the OIPA that executive management has exceeded its authority and, quote, circumvented the board's authority to govern Sandag, unquote. It also recommended that the board should, quote, formally investigate the legality of management's actions, unquote. The criticism made by the OIPA and Sandag executive management and the remarks of management should be investigated by a third party, possibly the Department of Justice or the San Diego County District Attorney's Office if appropriate. I recommend the Big Five Moves project be shelved and Sandag Board of Directors refuel the Transnet project, along with the current proposed modifications to the HOV lanes for rapid transit. I have no issue with many of the concepts outlined in the Big Five Moves, but is unwieldy, expensive plan. And I suggest we get back to the Transnet program and improve on it. We really need to get back to work. I'd also like to congratulate the OIPA for their professional work in bringing these issues to the Board of Directors and for the board for publicly sharing this information. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Francesca, who do we have up next?
Chair, I see, oh, I apologize. The person I see has the initials ENL. I don't have any other information for them.
ENL, you're up.
Hi, good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. This is Eduardo Luna. I'm the former city auditor for the city of San Diego. I've been an auditor for 30 years, specifically a municipal auditor for 25 years. What I observed and read and listened to last week was really unprecedented. Management's actions to redact a final audit report are really inappropriate, and that should be reviewed. Also, I'd just like to recommend to the board and the audit committee to support and maintain the integrity of this audit function. It helps promote transparency and accountability. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Francesca?
I see no other speakers at this time.
Okay, I appreciate that. It's now time for board discussion and first I want to thank the auditor, Mary, and your office, also Sandag staff, members of the audit committee, Chair Baber, Mayor Wells, Mr. Halpern, Mr. Monson, Mr. Dostart. I'm thankful that staff in many areas of their response has already accepted the auditor's recommendations. However, there is clearly disagreement over the most serious allegations, the issue of bonuses and management severance agreements and payments to departing employees. In simple terms, was the executive director required to notify the board, and did he take actions that were permissible? The auditor believes the executive director exceeded his authority and that his actions may have violated the law. Sandag staff and general counsel disagree vehemently. And a third opinion that we heard this morning from the outside law firm retained by the audit committee concluded that the actions appear to be within the authority of management. I'm not yet satisfied that we have a clear answer on that. However, it is clear to me that the executive director exercised poor judgment on that issue. He should have informed board leadership about his reorganization plans and the severance negotiations. That no one on this board was consulted or informed is unacceptable and violates basic principles of accountability and transparency. And no, we can't turn back the clock on that and undo that mistake. But I agree with the independent auditor. We must have an independent review to determine beyond the shadow of a doubt if those actions were legal and permissible. Public institutions rely on the trust of their constituents. So today we have to act to retain that trust. With that, I look forward to hearing from my colleagues, questions and comments, and hopefully finding a path forward.
Mr. Chair, it's Bill Baber. I didn't use all my time. Can I ask our legal counsel, John Kirk, to respond on the recent statements about the redactions?
Mr. Kirk?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the issue of the redactions, I will Our team was involved, and this is discussed in the management response, I think specifically at page 293. And ultimately, what was followed at this point, not in what was provided to the audit committee. What was provided to the audit committee, the decision maker here, was a fully unredacted version of this, but in the portion that was provided to the public at that preliminary stage, we looked at in terms of what does the government code, first of all, say about this? And the government code recognizes a balance of public interest and disclosure against the individual privacy interest at stake. And part of that, in looking at how that balance is undertaken, a part of that balancing test is a determination of the extent to which disclosure of the requested information will shed light on the public agency's performance of its duties. I believe that management, our office assisting them, tried to make that balance in good faith, recognizing both the privacy of the employees as well as what is truly at stake here, the names of employees at stake. We felt that that did not in any way impact the conclusions and the questions in the audit. So that is why those redactions were made. We recognize the board's authority to say moving forward, it's never going to happen, and that's fine. But looking back, that is why the decisions were made.
Thank you, Mr. Kirk. Let me see who I have on my screen. Mayor Solis. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you again. Oh, there's an echo. Thank you to the audit committee.
Maybe if you turn your volume down. Now we can't hear you.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Better? Can you hear me?
Go ahead.
Can you hear me at all?
We can hear you, but we're still getting feedback.
Okay.
Why don't you take a minute to sort that out, and we'll come back to you, if you don't mind.
I totally did not hear that because I tried to lower the volume here as much as possible.
What I'm going to do is give you a minute to resolve that feedback issue. There may be a second computer in the room that has audio on. We'll come back to you if you can get that squared away.
Thank you.
I have on my screen Supervisor Desmond.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks everybody for the great report. I think we're kind of losing sight here with legal opinions. We're here to hear our auditor's report, and even though maybe it was legal, maybe whatever, it wasn't legal. I think it was a good judgment. Was it good government? Was it good governance? Is really what we want to try to achieve, and through the integrity, and get the integrity of the voters. So I don't think any of the recommendations made by the auditor are insurmountable, and I don't think any one entity, the executive director, legal staff, and the board. I mean, we're complicit in this as well, and we did not have many of these guidelines in place ahead of time. So, I really think we have to, instead of what's legal, what's not legal, is what are the findings? What can we do to, get those findings reconciled or not? But at least I think we need to move on those as opposed to what's legal or not, because the legal stuff is not gonna help us. I mean, is it legal to redact? We can get many opinions on that. Is it good judgment? Probably not. Is it legal to make the go ahead of the board before with making statements to the press before the board makes an opinion? No. Is it legal to give bonuses and severance? Maybe. But is it good judgment when the position that we're in? And is it good judgment to give campaign contributions to candidates who are running against your board. It's legal, but it's not good judgment. And I think more than ever, Sandag, we got to keep the confidence of the public. The audit report is just another example of some of the issues going on at Sandag, some of the problems we have, and the board's complicit at this as well. But I think it negatively impacts the entire region and loses the trust of the voters. I say this, and I know many people don't believe it, but I want Sandag to succeed. I want our region to prosper, and I want a balanced transportation plan. AB 805 created the requirement of hiring an independent auditor. Independent auditor. The bill allows for the auditor to investigate fraud, waste, impropriety at the agency. The bill also required the board adopt guidelines, which I think are the recommendations, to prevent and detect fraud, waste, and impropriety. And I believe, the auditor's report, without pointing fingers, it makes decent recommendations that are not unsurmountable. So I'm going to start off and just make a motion here that we accept the report, including the findings. We direct the staff to work with the independent auditor on implementation of the proposed recommendations. And I know we've got answers back and forth right now, but I think we should work out these recommendations. Let us know where you can meet and fix. I'm getting an echo now. All right. Okay. To accept the report and the findings, direct the staff to work with the independent auditor and implement an implementation plan for the proposed recommendations. And if they can't make agreement, why not? And report back to the board with that implementation plan within 90 days. And if we have to do it in another 90 days, but I think the recommendations were good. Maybe not all of them are legal, but I think they're good for good governance of the organization. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Desmond. Mayor Solis, are you prepared to?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Better? Okay. Well, I wanted to, again, thank all of our colleagues here for having this really candid discussion. Thank you, Chair, for calling the meeting. I think it was something of necessity. And also to the Audit Committee, thank you for all your work. I think it's also to the Office of the Independent Auditor. Thank you again for committing to your role. Thank you. So one of the things that I find interesting is that, AB 805 is both touted and then criticized in its holistic way of really trying to get to transparency and engaging our board and our executives and really trying to shed light on how taxpayer dollars are used. And when an audit committee is brought about and as part of our bylaws, they're responsible for making sure that we are using best management practices, our audit numbers, our numbers fiscally match up, and that we are doing it with the utmost integrity and transparency to the taxpayers. And I would just have to say that with the reports, and I'll say plural because there was several attachments that were sent to us, I think that it's really important that we receive the plan or the report, but we also to work on ways to have staff implement them. I don't think there's questions as to how we get to that point because we are an agency that is constantly growing. I think if government is stagnant, then we lose track of that growth and that real ability to ebb and flow with that finger of the pulse of our community. And so I think there are some good recommendations that I think we should move forward to. Now, with regards to, how staff does that, I think it's really important that we have the staff have an opportunity to, create that type of, you know, whether it be an action plan or, you know, next steps. I think there's great opportunity. Again, it's not the language complicit. I rather see myself as a team member and not good, bad. I see it as making better. And if for whatever reason it's not there yet, then let's take a step back, take a deep breath, and move forward. And I really appreciated your comments, Chair, about this being that ability to do that, because we have so many opportunities. Transportation plan is our priority, and we need to have that at the forefront. And so I think the question at hand, I think, is again with who and how people can make decisions, knowing that when decisions do get made at the executive level, there are responsibilities that they can make. And we're not the day-to-day operators. We are the policy makers. So if at the policy level, we need to make a change, then so be it. And I think those recommendations are there as part of the audit committee. And because rules, you know, we're able to implement, then maybe this is that opportunity to do so. And I think, yeah, I think there's opportunity, again, maybe for another legal opinion, but I will, you know, be open to hearing more and more about next steps. But again, Chair, thank you for, again, setting this up, having this really acknowledge what the issues are at hand, and again, to the audit committee and to the independent auditor. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor Jones.
Oh, my apologies. Oh, no.
Looks like you may have two computers in the same room with audio on, no? Anyway, take it away.
Let me try again. That can't be on my end if I mute myself and it's still making that noise. Okay. All right. When we hired our outside auditor to comply with AB 805, we did that in hopes of transparency and making sure that we are on the right direction of coming back from what we had happening in 2016. And I'm not sure why anyone but our auditor is weighing in on whether findings are valid. So it appears to be that we have a systemic culture of executive level and above employees receiving excessive pay raises and bonuses, and I'm seeking transparency. When I asked for this audit, my hopes would be that we were able to prove to San Diego taxpayers and residents that we are living up to our fiduciary responsibility to them, guarding their tax dollars with great care. Where we are today has been shocking to me personally, with an audit performed, an audit performed by professional auditors with so many years of experience, and them being attacked by some members of our audit committee and also management staff. This has to stop. As I read the audit, it became clear as to why, though, because we have been less than transparent since the 2016 scandal that plagued us of lots of wasteful spending, and that has continued to be occurring. How do we move forward? I believe that we have a choice that is acceptable, and that is to accept the audit and then also to implement all the recommended actions, every single one of them. We must bring SANDAG actions into light with full transparency and no more fabrications. We did have pay raises under the guise of changing titles, or in the case of our general counsel on page 69 of the audit, no change in title, but an 18% pay increase, nearly $40,000 of taxpayer dollars. With these reclassifications without any written class comp studies, mind you, costing our agency $1.367 million each year. I'd like to have a question answered at the end after I'm done with my comments, and that is asking our director or management to clarify when the raises were given and was the increase noted in the 2021 budget, because it is actually noted in the auditor's finding. And then also why there is no class comp study. On page 56 of the audit, it shows that 42 of the roughly 400 Sandag employees since 2014, so this didn't just start, received 56% of all the bonuses, all upper level and executive management. Why is it that we have this ongoing systemic abuse? Severance. We have employees that have left the agency, as in the case of our chief operations officer, who left in July of this year, receiving a $60,000 severance payment when she shared with me personally in text messages that she was leaving the agency due to a personal health related decision and that she decided to take some time off to slow things down, in her words, not mine. A resignation does not justify the use of $60,000 of taxpayer funds, more than many people make in a year. And I'm sure a lot of people on this call make less than $60,000 a year. It's a gift of public funds, as it was noted in the audit. And we're not supposed to be paying, we can't afford to pay publicly or anyway people bonuses when they leave the agency just because they decide to leave. It's not a good use of taxpayer funds. And then the delegation of authority. There's quite a bit of discussion around this in the employee handbook that has never even been approved by this board, and we're the policymakers. That's seen on page 41 of the audit. This board has a fiduciary responsibility to each resident of our county, each one of them. We must stop wasteful spending of money that our taxpayers work hard for, and we must fight for transparency and to clear the Sandag name. Our reputation and the trust of our public is vital to the health and future of this agency. We must unify today for the good of all residents with our regional hats on to stop this systemic abuse and culture of misuse of funds. We must bring integrity to an organization that has operated in a wasteful manner so we can do what we need to do, deliver projects that move people around by building that infrastructure. And we can't do that if we're wasting money. So that's all I really have to say, but I really would like to see us unified today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Could someone from staff respond to Mayor Jones's question about how those matters were reflected in the budget? Ray, we can't hear you.
Sorry, Mr. Chair. I believe that Melissa Kofelt, your Director of the Organizational Effectiveness Department, can respond to that one.
Okay, thank you. Melissa, good morning.
Good morning. So if I recall or heard the questions from Mayor Jones, one of those pertained to when the raises were given with respect to the reorganization. Those were approved last September, October timeframe, and those new salary amounts were flowed into the FY 2021 budget that the board considered earlier this year. The second question I'd noted was why no class comp study was done. At the time, or prior to the reorganization, we asked our compensation consultant to go back and to re-benchmark, check the salary ranges for for key executive positions that we had previously benchmarked. Those have been sort of used as the standard to set the salary ranges for executive level compensation. So we did recheck those before the reorganization, as part of the reorganization and prior to making any salary decisions. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. Councilmember Moreno.
Hi.
Good morning.
Good morning. You guys can hear me, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So first and foremost, I want to say thank you to the Office of the Independent Performance Auditor for your salaries and compensation performance and compliance audit. I'd also like to thank the SANDAG management for your response, and a big thanks to the Audit Committee and Chair Bill Baber for all of your hard work on this. Look, I take my obligation as a board member for oversight of this organization very seriously. And I want to make it clear at the start, this is not the old SANDAG. Under this board and executive director, SANDAG will not bury or ignore audit findings. We will take this audit seriously and respond appropriately. Now, I'm going to focus my comments primarily on the recommendations because I want to be forward-looking. I accept that the auditor has made findings and has suggested recommendations based on them. I also accept that management vigorously denies that these findings rise to the level of fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, abuse of power, or gift of public funds. And I certainly do not see any evidence in this audit that any crime was committed. But I believe it is the board's responsibility to evaluate the recommendations made by the auditor and indicate which ones we agree with and intend to implement and which ones we disagree with and will not implement. Regarding the auditor's recommendation based on finding 1, I'm generally in agreement, except for the reference to the documents titled Administrative Rules and Regulations. SANDAG management has stated that this document is obsolete and hasn't been in use since 2003. The auditor has expressed concern that this document was never formally repealed. And so I think in response to finding 1, the board should formally rescind the 2003 Administrative Rules and Regulation document and implement the balance of the finding 1 recommendations. I agree with all of the auditor's recommendations based on finding 2 and based on their response. I think that management also agrees. I agree with all of the auditor's recommendations based on finding 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. For the recommendations based on finding 8, I agree with all of them except the second one, which states reverse salaries for high-level positions to salaries prior to September 2019 salary schedule revision. I think management should only consider such a revision based on the needs assessment and salary comparison analysis. So this recommendation, I think, is precipitous. But I do support the balance of the recommendation based on finding 8. For finding 9, I share management's legal concerns regarding recommendation 1 and 2, and I can't simply support them. I do support recommendation 3 based on finding 9, which states develop and formalize procedures for openly advertising and competitively hiring for SANDAG positions in accordance to applicable rules and regulations. For the recommendations based on finding 10, I agree with SANDAG management that this recommendation is not necessary. Therefore, we shouldn't implement it. This is my input of the auditor's recommendation, but I think it's going to take a lot more than 1 meeting for the board to reach a consensus on the appropriate response to this audit. Therefore, I would like to make a motion that we receive the auditor's report and request that staff create an action plan that appropriately addresses the audit finding and recommendation. The action plan should be brought to the audit committee and the board for consideration. To the extent possible, staff should incorporate into the action plan all the comments from the board today, as well as the recommendations from the audit committee. Staff should include in this action plan the retention of outside counsel to investigate allegations of illegality or impropriety included in the audit. This is my motion, and that concludes my comments. Thank you.
And this is Mary Salas, and I will second that motion. Thank you.
Hang on, Mary. Thank you, Councilmember Moreno. We have a second from Mayor Salas. I wonder if you would be open to a minor friendly amendment. I think I heard you say that staff would be in charge of getting another expert opinion regarding the allegations about bonuses and severance pay. If you're willing, I would like to alter that ever so slightly so that the executive committee would be in charge of setting up that investigation, reviewing it, and bringing it to the board, just so we keep a system of checks and balances. Would you be amenable to that, Councilmember Moreno?
You're the chair, of course.
And for clarification, this is a substitute motion, Mr. Maker
Yes,
of the motion.
and I agree with that as well.
It's not a substitute motion because we didn't get a second, or because the previous motion didn't get a second on the floor, so therefore I presented my motion.
Want to triple check? Thank you.
Or at least that's my, sorry, I know we have parliamentarians here.
Okay. Who do I have for further comment? So we have a motion and a second.
Myself, in a
okay.
second.
We
But I'd
have
also like to make a comment. Yes,
Yes,
so first of all, thank you very much to the audit committee, to the auditor, to everybody that participated in this review. It's really important that we reestablish trust in Sandag. And I fully support the motion that's been made by Vivian and also the amendment of the chair. And I also want to comment that, Chair Desmond made some very interesting comments that are so true. And that is that we are kind of in this mess because we're implicit in it, because we as a board really didn't have that focus and that oversight about what was going on. However, what was done was within the purview, and as Chair Desmond said, it was legal. So now it's up to us. If we're not happy with those policies and procedures that allowed for this, then this is an excellent time for the board to regain control and examine those policies and then put forward the recommendations that we want. And to be clear, is that I think that it's the board's responsibility to implement those recommendations that they agree with, and not to just take carte blanche all the recommendations of the auditor or all the responses of management. So those are my comments today. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Feller.
There I go.
There you are.
So we were head over heels over Mary's and having her join us a couple of years ago. And I think what I've seen is an outstanding job of her being a independent auditor. I don't think she did this in a bubble. She had 5 people working with her. She's consulted and had plenty of assistance from auditors. Sandag got into this position over the years of having things not working as it should. And so I think what we're really facing now is the mean truth of how the organization is run. This is run by a board of directors with professional staff, and professional staff should not be doing anything that is outside of their purview. And we as members of this board need to be making our stand over each issue if it is deemed something that is, off the path as far as the independent auditor. We all agreed that this auditor was perfect for the job. And so I think you can't lose sight of that at all. We have professional people, each one of us working in our cities, but we trust their job, but it's our job to kind of keep an eye on them. I think the independent auditor has completed the task, and I think we should be looking at all these suggestions, at least looking at them besides just accepting a few and giving and taking. You know, this is the real world. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Mr. Feller. Supervisor Gaspar.
Thank you very much. First question. I'm curious to know how much money we've spent on attorneys that have weighed in on the independent auditor's report.
Can someone from staff respond to that?
This is Ray Trainer. I believe the audit committee hired the attorney, and the contract amount was originally set at $50,000. That contract was recently amended in order to enable the independent legal counsel to participate in today's meeting.
Thank you. And I've been reviewing the regulatory framework of that audit committee. Do they have the authority to hire attorneys?
Maybe Mr. Kirk?
I'll look to Office of General Counsel to respond to the authority that is invested in your audit committee.
Ultimately, your audit committee works at your direction as the board, as any other policy advisory committee does. And like them, the board, there is a budget for board actions. I'm not sure exactly what that is called, but there's an administrative budget for the board of directors. And I believe that the audit committee would fall under that. But ultimately, it has to do with the authority that you vest in them. Now, the audit committee has in the past talked about, and I believe they have a budget item specifically that was brought to you as part of their budget amendment at some point late last year that talks about hiring independent counsel, not specifically related to this, but in the anticipation that they may need independent legal opinion. So it is certainly not unprecedented. It's similar to the ITOC. The ITOC also in the past, they have a budget, and they have also hired independent legal counsel. So ultimately it comes under that board administrative budget.
And I think that's internal control we ought to take a look at, because I think it would be very appropriate if the audit committee or other committees that might have this authority, that they would return to the full board of directors before procuring those services to see whether there's interest at the board level to make that happen. I just have one additional question before making some comments. When was the Senat memo drafted, and who was the primary author of the memo?
Mr. Kirk?
I do not have that memo in front of me, so I can't give you the exact date, but it was drafted during the course of this audit. I would estimate it was drafted approximately June of 2020. He was the author of the memo, I believe, and it was drafted now recalling the actions that he took in the times that were described in the memo.
Thank you for that. Well, first I'd like to open up by saying that I'd like to echo a statement that was made in the Office of the Independent Auditor's report, that they found SANDAG staff to be the real body and soul of this organization. Staff have shown their commitment to the purpose, mission, and goals of SANDAG through this action, and I agree wholeheartedly. And I want to thank our staff for their tremendous work. So my comments today are not framed around their efforts. I'd also like to speak to the credibility of the auditor and the process. I've checked into Mary's background, and Mary has decades of statewide audit experience. She's worked at the California State Controller's Office, the California Office of the Attorney General, the Department of Energy, and the Department of Corrections. She comes to us with, I think, over 25 years of experience. At the audit committee meeting, Mary stated that she has never experienced this degree of interference and impairment of independence from a government agency by their management and audit committee chair. And this is something that was very concerning to me. It's a serious allegation and points to a very serious cultural problem. AB 805 rightfully pointed out, I'm very critical of. One of the things I'm not critical of in AB 805, perhaps the only thing, was the establishment of the Independent Performance Auditor Office because of that scandal in 2016. Need I stress the word independent in the title of the Independent Performance Auditor? This person should always be independent. And that's because an audit is not a legal process. It's a rigorous, well-defined process that must be adhered to. An audit relies on facts and figures and available documentations, not assertions or inferences. And we should not be holding this up to a legal standard. It's interesting because management's actions to alter the auditor's report are blatant interference in an audit process. And this should never have happened and should never ever happen again. There are very clear reasons why we have auditors as well as legal oversight. Just look at the city of Bell and numerous school districts and other cities to know how important the role of an independent auditor can be. These cities relied on legal advice. They were told that everything that was happening was fine, and they still failed due to corruption. It's very important there's a distinction between an auditor and attorneys. AB 805 lays out a clear relationship between the independent performance auditor and the board, and yet, as a board member, I didn't even know if I was able to call the auditor directly. That needs to change. In terms of the Audit Policy Advisory Committee and audit activities, I just have a big problem with our audit committee being able to have the authority to hire legal counsel and contest findings without ever doing a check-in with the board. Was that within their ability to do? I don't really know, but if it was, it shouldn't be. They should have to do a check-in. Again, scandal in 2016, that's what we're trying to recover from. So whether or not all of these things were legal really isn't the question. Whether these things were the best practice is what we need to focus on. I find that the restructuring of Sandag to be top heavy with management to be one of the most egregious things in here. I also have a problem because repeatedly during the budget hearings, Supervisor Desmond asked whether raises were given during those deliberations, and it was very confusing. All of the answers that we were being given were very confusing. So to see this pop up in the auditor's report, again, gained my attention. To see that the agency significantly added to the number of top-level managers within the organization without justification is concerning. It resulted in salary costs for executive management increasing from approximately $897,000 to close to $1.4 million per year going forward. Several top-level managers received unjustified raises after their positions were retitled, but their job duties didn't change. That's a big problem. The executive director expanding the executive team from 11 to 26 employees through this change was not justified by an increase in Sandag's workload, nor does the increased size of the executive team appear to increase the productivity of the organization overall. And worse, as board members, we did not understand these fundamental changes that were being made and the implications of them, and that is indeed a problem. You know, the audit committee member, Stuart Halpern, I think stated it best when we opened today. Today, we have the opportunity as a board to stand up for good governance with a firm commitment that never again will an audit process be interfered with, and we have to stand up for stronger internal controls as an organization. The motion on the floor today excludes the most egregious findings, which warrant our most careful oversight and consideration. I cannot support a motion that excludes these findings. It's up to us to be as comprehensive as possible and really give this audit the time and attention that it deserves. And I'm also a little curious because Supervisor Desmond at the opening made a motion. We had no opportunity to second that motion. And now we have a substitute motion on the floor. So just procedurally, there's an issue.
Thank you, Supervisor. Francesca, who do we have in queue?
Councilmember Zito would like to speak next.
Mr. Zito.
Thanks, Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Thanks. And as everybody else, I would like to thank all of the people that have been working hard on this audit, particularly the Office of the Independent Auditor. It's been great to get the information, as painful as it is. It is worthy of note that this is the first one that we've gone through, and as expected, it's turning out to be somewhat painful. And in some regards, that doesn't surprise me, although the findings or the comments about how much resistance has been encountered is a little concerning. I do think it's been very challenging because the amount of information that's been thrown at us very quickly. I appreciated the approach that Councilmember Moreno went through, and wish that we could all do that as board members and go through and talk about each one of the findings, but I suspect that would be an extremely lengthy process to go through in at least this particular meeting. So I'm curious if we've got ideas about how we can facilitate such a conversation or such a set of feedback. Oops, somebody just came off mute. Thank you. And, you know, is there ability that, you know, if we send this back and approve the motion that was made, that board members should be sending information to staff that they can be on their thoughts of the various conclusions of the audit committee, and that gets incorporated into the process that's being brought forward by the executive committee and how we're going to continue to resolve the outstanding issues. Is that a good process? Because I do think it would be good to hear from more members about each one of the recommendations, because I also agree with Mayor Salas's comment that that we should be clearly addressing every one of the auditor's recommendations, but we don't necessarily have to follow every single one. And as an example, in my case, I do think it would be incredibly disruptive to take all the positions that were filled by appointment and vacate them and do an open and competitive process at this point. You know, one of the interesting things that we hear all the time about government is how slow and ponderous it is. And having been on the hiring side, when you go through a open process that recruits evenly across all sectors and go outside of the organization anywhere, it usually takes 6 to 8 months to fill such a position. And if you're trying to get your regional transportation plan done on time and you have somebody in-house that can do the job, I think it's entirely reasonable to go ahead and appoint someone to fill that position. It should be done so transparently. It should be done so in a way that we can look at the records and determine that, yes, that person is able to meet the role and do the job and do it effectively. But I do think that it is a perfectly reasonable way to move forward. So I'm certainly not fully aligned with all of the recommendations, but do think that a lot of them have merit, and we should be trying to move through and implementing some of these governance items as quickly as possible. The last question I would pose just to the recommendation, you know, I heard some discussion about needing to validate the legality of the actions that were taken so far. And we do have one opinion from an independent attorney that was hired by the audit subcommittee. And whether, you know, it's unclear to me why that opinion isn't sufficient at this point in time. And if we're going to go do that again, the question would be why, you know, what are we going to do and what are we going to line around to make sure that that can be the last and final opinion, as opposed to saying, well, we're not happy with that opinion either, so let's go hire somebody else. But, you know, at this point, I'm kind of satisfied from a legal perspective with the opinion that was made by the attorney that was hired from the independent auditor, or not the independent auditor, from the audit committee, subcommittee, to determine whether or not those actions were legal. And regardless, that seems to be less important than whether or not they were correct. And it certainly behooves us to get to a point where we can make sure that information like that is coming back to the full board so we know what's going on, because that is, the transparency is the important item here. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Zito. Mr. Baber.
This is a point of order, Mr. Chair. Here's what I heard. Desmond made a motion, no second. And then Vivian made a motion, and it was a second. So I don't, can you ask the parliamentary person? I don't interpret Vivian's motion as being a substitute. I interpret it to be the original, because Desmond's was never second, unless I'm wrong.
Thank you, Mr. Baber.
Who's our parliamentarian? Is that Mr. Kirk? Can you get a ruling on that so we don't have, you know, that misstated in the press?
Mr. Kirk.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I did not hear a second to Mr. Desmond's motion, and I did not hear you as the chair have the prerogative to recognize motions in second. I don't believe that I heard you recognize one. So the motion on the floor by Councilmember Moreno, I believe, is the primary motion, and I show that it was seconded by Mayor Salas. Mayor Desmond's motion may still be considered by the board. It is not in conflict with the motion that is on the board. So even if there was resolution either way on Councilmember Moreno's motion, the board can still consider Supervisor Desmond's motion in the course of this meeting.
So are you saying that the two motions to your read do not conflict?
I don't see that they do conflict. But again, you have discretion as the chair to recognize or not recognize a motion. In my opinion, they do not conflict.
When Supervisor Desmond made his motion, I did not hear a second or see a second. It's difficult in real time here to have a comparison of the elements of Mr. Desmond's motion and the elements of the motion that was seconded from Councilmember Moreno. I wonder if there's a way to have someone quickly drop a chart so we see where they are in sync with one another. Do we have another hand up at this point? Mayor Jones.
Yes. So I would like to go back to Supervisor Desmond's motion. I think it was to accept the report, including the findings, direct staff to work, and I'm trying to read my notes, so I could have this wrong. Direct staff to work with the independent auditor on an implementation plan for the proposed recommendations and to report back to the board with the implementation plan for adoption within 90 days. I actually will second that motion if that was the original motion. So if we can maybe have Supervisor Desmond clarify that. I was in agreement with him at the time, but again, I'm reading from scribbled notes because I was trying to write so quickly.
Mayor Voss, what I had recognized was I heard Mayor Desmond make a motion about never redacting a report, and that, my opinion, was based upon that. That's what I found was not in conflict. If this is his motion, I would say this is in conflict with Councilmember Moreno's motion. And
okay,
so,
well that will be my substitute motion then.
That works.
Thank you. Second.
Mayor Jones, would you
Yes.
please restate your substitute motion for clarity here?
Okay, so I will add I didn't read that in my notes. I was on a different sheet of paper. Never redacting the paperwork, as Mr. Kirk just said, accepting the report, including all of the findings, to direct staff to work with the independent auditor on an implementation plan for the proposed recommendations, and then to report back to the board with the implementation plan for adoption within 90 days.
Second.
I'm sorry, who's that second?
This is the problem with being able to do a second if you're on the phone. This is Supervisor Kristen Gaspar.
Thank you, Supervisor Gaspar. Further discussion, please.
I guess I would just ask the motioner for an implementation plan for all proposed recommendations. And maybe there isn't a plan for some, but I want all recommendations considered.
So
yes, that's fine with me.
Chair Voss? That's fine with the seconder.
Okay, thank you.
Chair Voss?
Is that Mayor Salas?
As the second to the original motion that was placed by Vivian Moreno, I think that there was clear discussion about my acceptance of some of the recommendations that are in the auditor's report, but not all of them. And I clearly stated that it is our responsibility as a board to set policy, not for the auditor to set policy, but for the board to set policy. And that's why we have to bring this back to the examination of the entire board, I think, in order for us to vote as a board which recommendations we think are practical and doable. And so I think that's a clear distinction of the two boards, of the two motions. Excuse me, I'm on my phone, so it's really difficult. Okay, but that's of the difference of motions.
And I know you are out of town, and I appreciate you making time to participate in this meeting. I'm still not clear, Mayor Jones, Supervisor Desmond. You're directing staff to work with her on all of her recommendations. Are you saying all of the recommendations must be implemented, or that they should work with her and then the board will ultimately decide which are implemented?
I think that the board will ultimately decide, for me, that they should work out. I know we've got pros and cons, actually. We got the management's report and some of these things and others. And maybe it's just, management keeps its position, particularly on the salary issue. I know that's one's going to be complicated, is to roll everybody back. And maybe, management just stays its position, and the auditor stays their position. But on other ones that I think can be implemented, and I guess just to bring that back for all of us so that we can all vote on all of them. I agree with Mary Salas that we should, they look at it, bring it back to the board, and then we kind of go one at a time through those and see and basically we're going to be talking about the ones where they weren't able to make agreement. I think there's more that they can agree upon than not.
Okay.
Chair, can we get a clarification from Councilmember Moreno's motion? I guess it might clarify what you were asking as well.
Well, I think there's more agreement between these two motions than it might first appear. I think Councilmember Moreno, and I'll allow her to speak for herself, was suggesting that she wanted to reject a few of the recommendations out of hand. The substitute motion is suggesting that staff work with the independent auditor and then come back to the board for the board to make the final decision about which of those recommendations are put in place. Correct me if I'm wrong, Mayor Jones or Supervisor Desmond, but I'd be happy to hear from Councilmember Moreno.
I just want to let you guys know that there is a substitute motion on the floor by Mayor Jones, and I will be voting no on that substitute motion. Thank you.
So for clarification, yes, Chair Voss, that's my motion looks good. The problem that I had with the motion by Councilmember Moreno is that it takes away authority from our actual independent auditor, and then it talks about recommendations by the audit committee. I don't believe that really covers the spirit of what AB 805 was for. It's an independent auditor outside, and I have a real problem with that. So anyway, all of my motion looks right, and yes, never redacting auditing reports. Yep, that looks good. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Jones. I think Mr. Baber wanted to speak again.
I'm opposing Member Desmond's motion.
Thank you. Anyone else that wants to speak?
I would like to comment.
Vice Chair Blakespear, good morning.
Yeah. Good morning. So it seems to me like the main difference is actually the involvement of a further outside analysis of wrongdoing. So I read Councilmember Moreno's motion as saying that there needed to be a full investigation from another outside party. And then Councilmember Zito said he felt like the outside party we hired had handled that one issue, and the motion that's on the table has it handled internally. So basically these two, executive director, management team, and auditing team, work together on an implementation plan. So they're basically needing to merge and come back to us with recommended changes without going out to another third party. So to me, that seems like the biggest difference. And I just wanted to clarify that and see if anyone else sees it that way, because in many ways, this motion on the table is more constrained in that it's going to happen a lot faster, I think, than going out to another full analysis outside. And then also it keeps the, I guess, discretionary decision-making in terms of what comes back to us inside of the agency, because it's our current auditor and our current management team, and not having yet another third or fourth or fifth outside party. So I just wanted to make those comments.
Yeah, and I feel torn on this, but I think it's very important. We've got to remove, in my mind, any shadow of a doubt that what was done was improper or illegal. And that was why I wanted that outside investigation, and I wanted it to be overseen by the executive committee. Any other hands up? I don't have everybody on my screen. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, I do real quick, Chair Voss.
Is that Mayor Jones?
You know, yes, sorry, Mayor Jones. I would say that we can add to mine, and since I'm the maker of the substitute motion, and then we can see if my second would also change that. And that is, I'm very uncomfortable about an attorney weighing in on an audit. And first of all, one other thing that I would like to say, I'm not quite sure why the chair of the audit committee keeps, I feel like there might be interfering going on. I'm a little uncomfortable with what's happening right now. And so I know this is the first time we've done this, but I just don't really understand what's happening right here. But I would like to say that if we do, and I think it's a good idea to actually maybe have a peer review, but I don't feel like an attorney would be appropriate, because I don't feel like an attorney actually is an auditor and understands audits the same way that an actual auditor would. And so I would like to add to my motion that we have a peer review by an auditor, the same type of auditor, make sure that there's no conflict of interest, no connection to any of the parties at Sandag or with our outside independent auditor, because I really want to preserve the part of AB 805 that I absolutely have always agreed with, and that is being 100% outside, independent, and not having any meddling happening. So I will add that to my motion.
Thank you, though I respectfully disagree. I think it's critical that the further review, I feel certain we can find someone with audit, fraud, and legal expertise to weigh in on this. So at this point, I'm with Councilmember Moreno.
Chair Voss,
Yes, who's that?
this is Mayor Haviland from Del Mar.
Good morning, Mayor.
A comment before we go to a vote,
Yes, ma'am.
and I would also like a clarification. To me, one of the main differences between the two motions is Councilmember Moreno's motion asks for the board to weigh in on these recommendations before decisions are made. And the motion on the table has staff working with the independent auditor and then coming back to the board. And given the complexity of this and the large number of recommendations that were made by the independent auditor, it's important that the board weigh in on those before it goes to negotiation between staff and the auditor. And another concern I have is, given that transparency is essential to the success of Sandag, I both understand and agree with the sense of urgency to discuss this audit, but we lose credibility when 400+ pages of reports are released to the public less than 24 hours before the meeting. So as a board member, I received most of these documents in advance, so was able to come to this meeting prepared, but this information was not readily available to the public in a timely manner. And to me, it's not consistent with our goal to be transparent, which is all the more reason why I think the board needs to discuss the actual recommendations in detail more and give the public a chance to weigh in on it before we start making decisions on them.
Thank you, Mayor. Who do we have to speak?
Mayor Wells.
Mayor Wells.
Hi, thanks for letting me speak. Question for Mayor Jones. In the redaction issue, I'm a little concerned about the concept of not redacting salary numbers and names of employees. What are your thoughts on that?
I'm fine with names. I just, you know, when I looked at it, I felt like we should have the information as far as the actual job titles so I don't think I could accept that, but if we want to clarify that, I'm okay with clarifying that it would never ever contain any personal information of actual employees, like their name and that sort of thing. I'd be fine with clarifying that. So maybe so we could just say never redacting any auditor's report with the exception of names or personal information, not job description or title.
That's fair.
Mayor, Chair Boss.
Mr. Wells, were you finished?
Yes.
Supervisor Desmond.
I think we're getting too muddy with this thing. We hired a professional auditor who provided us a professional report. Her opinion is the names that were left in there were legal. And I know we could get lawyers to argue this for years possibly, but we hired a professional. And I think we should accept whatever she gives us and tell nobody else to touch it. That's, independent auditor. So, I'm kind of leery of the path that we're going down. And to Councilmember Moreno's motion, I thought it was a good motion, but I'm not ready to decide on those other issues that you've come up with a yes or no on already. I'd like to, and even as Mayor Haviland said, I got 400 pages yesterday put on my desk, and I did have some time to review other issues, other documents, but I think it's kind of a rush to judgment to say, which ones are good or bad at this point in time. Let's do that in 90 days. Let our two professionals that we hired, and without other attorneys coming in and weighing in on this, we've got two professionals that we pay a lot of money to. Let them come back to us, and if hopefully they're going to be able to work this out together. And basically, it would be the best interest of this agency if they could, and then bring it back to us, and then we vote up or down on their recommendations. I think that's kind of the better path for us, particularly for the integrity of the agency.
And let me just say, I waver back and forth, but Mayor Haviland made a good point. Many people have not had ample time to digest this. And I think the fundamental difference between Councilmember Moreno's motion and Mayor Jones's motion is whether we make a decision today on rejecting some of the findings or recommendations, or whether we consider those in 90 days. I wonder if there's an opportunity for us to come together as a board and say, okay, this is not perfect. Some of us would like to reject some of those today, but perhaps in the interest of full transparency, we would be wiser to take a step back and say, we can get to the same point, but we're just going to take a little more time and a little more thought process to do it. I'd welcome hearing from Councilmember Moreno and Mayor Salas.
Well, I lost him.
No, you're there, Councilmember Moreno.
Oh, okay. Oh, no, this is Mary, but I really would like to hear from Vivian, because I think from what I understood is she was just stating what she objected to, but it wasn't a motion to make the rejection today. Did I understand correctly, Ms. Moreno?
May I, Chair?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so I just want to reiterate, I'm going to be voting no on Mayor Jones's substitute motion, and I'm happy to speak on my motion when it is considered. Thank you.
But I still would like that clarification. We are not voting to reject some of the recommendations today.
Councilmember Moreno, I believe there were some that you were rejecting today in your motion. Could you clarify that for me?
My motion doesn't make a final decision. My motion stipulates that we'll be able to get to weigh in on an action plan.
Thank you. Mayor Salas?
Yes, so to me that means that we're not making a final vote today on omitting some of the recommendations or accepting some of the recommendations, that we need a more thorough and thoughtful review of that before we do that.
That's my understanding, and I think that's in essence what we have on the table here. So I find myself aligning with Mayor Jones and Supervisor Desmond. We're not rejecting anything out of hand. We're going to take more time and more input. But I do want to clarify that Mayor Jones, you were amenable to the executive committee overseeing one more look by an audit, fraud, legal mind to take a look at this.
Well, the executive committee can look at it, but I do want it to come back to the full board of directors.
No,
okay. And one other question: could we have the outside auditor weigh in?
Well, right now we're doing.
Mary has requested to speak, Chair.
Okay, we'll get there. Thank you. But I want to clarify, because it's the most important thing to me today is that we have an outside expert. I believe we can find someone with legal, audit, and fraud background to give us a clean bill of health on this, or tell us, no, it was wrong. That has to be part of it, and I believe it needs to be independent of the audit committee, independent of the independent auditor. Let the executive committee oversee it. That has to be part of this motion, or I'm out. Mary Kashmashram.
Thank you, Chair Voss. You know, something is very concerning for me. One, I need to make it very clear that it is not the auditor's job to demand or require the board or management to implement any of my recommendations. These are simply recommendations based on evidence, inquiries and reviews and testing that was performed by a professional auditor and auditors who follow professional standards and adhere to them, and who have regular scheduled peer reviews. I have been peer reviewed many, many times in my years, and I have performed peer reviews. I was also up as a state auditor up against Elaine Howe to be appointed as a state auditor. So I think my professional past history and experience should stand for something. Right now, I'm being told that an attorney can tell me I'm wrong. I'm being told that an investigator, outside legal, this and that can tell me I'm wrong. What I need to make clear to everybody here today is that we did a job which we were hired to do, and we had findings. And with those findings came recommendations. And the recommendations can be accepted by the board and management or not. And frankly, we are more than happy to be proactive and support and help that happen. But we, at this point, it's not our concern if they're implemented or not. Our job is to bring you the whole story, which is here's how we did, here's the professional standards we followed, here's what we have as evidence, here's our conclusion, here's our recommendation, and then really to support from that point forward how the board and management jointly work together to implement some, all, or none of those. I do want to recommend a couple of things. I do not believe it is appropriate today for Chair Baber to be a part or have a ability to weigh in.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I think since this is a board discussion, I think we did hear from the Office of the Independent Auditor. I appreciate your comments, but point of order, I think the whole point of this secondary discussion is for us as board members to discuss the motion on the floor. And I think we're moving way too much into one way or the other. And I think we heard both sides of the story. Although I appreciate Mary's comments right now, I think it's going way too far. And
thank you, Mayor.
We need to move on because this is another item.
I had actually asked to hear from our outside auditor.
Well, point of order, okay. Though, we are moving into additional
board members.
Board member. Chair.
Thank you, Mayor. Mary, I will give you another 30
I have to,
seconds wrap up.
I may not.
Well, they have Wi-Fi and stuff.
I'm
I-
sorry, Chair Voss,
okay.
am I allowed to?
I'm gonna leave this
Or
here.
would you like me to stop?
I'm not gonna enjoy it.
Mayor Salas, if you could mute your microphone. Mary Kashmashab, I'll give you 30 seconds to finish up. I want to.
Sure. I just simply want to say that we are okay with what is accepted or not accepted. There is a risk manager at Sandag, and I think it's important that the risk manager, along with, is sort of the bridge between the Office of the Independent Performance Auditor and management, that helps look at risk and determines if risks are there, whether a recommendation should be implemented or not.
Thank you.
So that's just my recommendation.
Thank you.
Sure.
Vice Chair Blakespear.
Yes, thank you. So I think there's a substantial amount of overlap between these two motions. And I wonder if it might be possible for the chair to synthesize them, and if it would be possible for the board to come together around one of the motions. To me, it seems like things have changed. There are a lot of additional comments being added. Like, for example, Rebecca Jones's motion was based on Supervisor Desmond's motion, but Supervisor Desmond said he doesn't want to involve outside third parties. And the chair, you said you definitely want to involve it. So but it seems to me like it's 85%, maybe even 95% the same. So is that something you might be open to doing for the sake of trying to create clarity and unity?
I completely agree. And I tried to say that a few minutes ago, but you were much more articulate and succinct. So thank you for that. My understanding of Mayor Jones's recommendation is to accept the report, allow staff to work with the independent auditor. I believe Mayor Jones also was willing to include the outside review that I feel very strongly about, overseen by the executive committee, that would come back to the board. Do I have that correct? And all of the recommendations, once they were hashed out between the Office of the Independent Performance Auditor and staff, would come back to the board for the board's final decision. Have I encapsulated that correctly, Mayor Jones?
Well, we put both motions up on the screen now for everyone to review side by side.
Thank you. Everybody get their glasses out like I am.
I mean, to me, it seems like one of the big differences is the outside law firm versus third-party auditor. So, and I don't know if Councilmember Moreno would like to weigh in on why.
Call for the vote. Can we just call for the vote on the substitute motion, which I'm going to vote no on?
Vice Chair Blakespear, please continue.
I just wanted some reflection on why that was part of it, was the outside law firm instead of third-party auditor. It seemed like that's a difference, but the rest of it seems pretty similar.
I would agree. I think there has been a question raised about the legality of the bonus payments and the legality of the severance payments. For us to have the complete trust and confidence of the public, I believe we need a legal analysis of that is independent of the audit committee, that reports, that is undertaken by the executive committee, so we can put that to bed. I suspect we can find someone that has the ability to do a peer review that is also an attorney. But
it sounds like you're in favor of the motion by the City of San Diego for that reason.
Well, I thought that Mayor Jones had agreed to include the outside legal review overseen by the executive committee. Am I mistaken, Mayor Jones? We're trying to pull this all together. Mayor Jones.
I'm sorry, I couldn't get my camera to go on. I'm okay with an attorney. I just want to make sure that they are only not whether the audit, not going into all the weeds on the audit itself, but on legality of the actual payments. I'm fine with that. I'm fine with that.
Okay, so we're getting closer. Vice Chair Blakespear, did you have anything further? Otherwise, we've got to call.
I would just say that it sounds to, I would recommend starting with the City of San Diego motion and then making any, I mean, I'm not saying procedurally start with it. I'm saying if you're trying to merge the two, to start with that one from that language and see what is the trouble with that, since the modifications you're making to Rebecca's motion are headed toward the City of San Diego motion, that we start with that one. Because when those were two next to each other, it did seem to me like that one was complete, addressed all the issues, and I wasn't clear on why we wouldn't go with that one, the City of San Diego motion.
Could we get both those motions up on the screen again, please?
And Chair, if I could, this is Mayor Sotelo Solis. I think it's one other semantic. It's the motion by City of San Diego. It's the action plan to be created by the staff. And then in the City of San Marcos, it's work with independent auditor. So I think, you know, being as how there is some contention, I think, to Mayor Havlin's point, I think if we have them staff work on it and then bring it to us, we can, and if the maker of the motion, I think San Marcos is amenable to that, I think it's just a semantic who's working with who, and they're all working together. But I think that's a big contention point.
Mayor
I'm
Jones?
sorry, this is so messy. When I'm looking at what they have my motion to be, it's not a peer review of the audit by an outside law firm. It's of certain elements, and that is the legality of the actual payments, not of the actual audit itself, because I think peer review needs to be done by an actual auditor, not a legal person, because I don't believe that they know all of the intricate little parts of it. I don't feel comfortable how that's written. So that doesn't capture it. And then,
do you feel the need for a peer review and settling the question of the legality?
Well, that's what you were asking for, Chair Voss. I was trying to be helpful to add that in for you.
I understand. What I'm
yes.
getting at is the peer review perhaps is superfluous at this point. I think we're saying we're receiving the auditor's report, accepting it as is, for the auditor to work with the staff and with the board to figure out implementation. The legal review, in my mind, is simply to answer those questions of legality, which again, I feel is critical. So I'm not sure that the peer review is necessary.
Actually, if you look at what we're talking about now, they did change it. They said retain a peer review of the audit by a third-party auditor and outside law firm for the legality of payments. I would be okay with that. I'm okay with that.
Okay.
And that's all auditor, not audit committee, because I really think we do need to, again, I said this, I know I sound like a broken record, but we do need to keep the outside auditor retaining, some semblance of being independent, because that's what the whole spirit of AB 805 is searching for. So I'm okay with my motion the way that it is now. And I will be supporting it, my own motion, thank you. But anyway, I'm ready to vote if everyone else is.
I'm not yet, Chair. I'm sorry, I've had my hand raised. I've tried to be patient. We're about to see the worst in AB 805. I can feel it, but I just take great offense with the board wanting to silence the independent auditor. I was very interested in what she had to say. I believe that this is an item that relates directly to that independent performance audit. Doesn't seem very independent when she gets a few seconds to speak. I think it seems like we don't want her on the record. She's put in this work. I want to hear from her. So if I can cede my time back to her and ask if she has any other comments, I would appreciate it.
Thank you, Supervisor Gaspar. Mary, did you have anything?
Thank you, Supervisor Gaspar. I appreciate that. I think it's just important to note that we have a peer review every 3 years. Mine would be up in about 1.5 years. And that's something that as an auditor, I'm required to bring in as a peer reviewer, a professional peer reviewer. And that is, like I said, up in 1.5 years. And what I'm basically being told is I, the auditor, need to be peer reviewed for some reason, which I'm fine with, by the way. I'm up for that challenge. But again, I have difficulty that I don't think we have an issue with the legality. In fact, we don't disagree with the outside attorneys at all. Our finding is more that he did not have the authority. There was no policy for him to have that delegated authority to act solely on his own without general counsel or the board's input or information to the board. And that is really our issue. So we don't disagree with outside counsel on if there was a colorable claim, then all of this could have been okay. We actually are in agreement with that. We just state that he never had the authority and there should be a policy in the future that allows for him to do that. And again, we're happy to work with management on helping to develop a corrective action plan and really encouraging the risk manager to be a part of that and determining for the best interest of the agency and to go to the board and have that discussion with the board on what a risk would be remain or the residual risk of not doing it versus doing it. And I think informing the board of that is very favorable for the board's opportunity to make the informed decision that needs to be made. And as far as the redacting, again, there were no names in this report. There was no reason to redact. It's all public information. And I am okay with redacting to assure confidentiality. I don't have a problem bringing that to the board before I issue anything public and having that discussion with the board. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Any final comment? Otherwise, we've had a call for the vote. Is that Mr. Bailey?
Yes, Chair. I just had a quick question I was hoping the legal counsel could address. Can legal counsel explain the difference between the language of, quote, accepting the report versus, quote, receiving the report? I believe it'd probably be more appropriate at this time with a substitute motion to be receiving the report than accepting the report. I'm hoping legal counsel can clarify.
Thank you, Mayor. Typically, accepting the report is to receive it and to take a particular motion with it, to take an action with it. Sometimes it'll be accepted for public distribution or something like that. For your purposes today, I don't believe that there's a critical distinction between receiving or accepting the report.
Thank you.
Mr. Bailey, anything further?
That's all. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I find both of these motions, the original and the substitute motion, to be essentially similar. I don't have a problem with voting to support either one. And with that, we will go to the vote. Francesca.
Thank you, Chair.
Oh, okay, okay. Okay.
Could we have microphones muted, please?
Are we voting on the substitute motion?
That is correct.
On the substitute motion for the City of Carlsbad, Mayor Pro Tem Blackburn.
Aye.
Thank you. For the City of Chula Vista, Mayor Salas. I'll move on and come back. For the City of Coronado, Mayor Bailey.
Yes.
City of Del Mar, Mayor Haviland.
No.
City of El Cajon, Mayor Wells.
Yes.
Whoa. You said that was the county vote, not the city vote.
Oh, I apologize. I think that was my mistake.
I think you put Del Mar. Well, I'm not sure, but the County A has not weighed in yet. I'm not.
Could you please clarify what we're voting on?
We're voting on the substitute motion from Mayor
The
Jones.
substitute motion by Mayor Jones.
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay, County of San Diego, Supervisor Desmond?
Yes.
Thank you.
That's on, in 2011.
You did Elmore. City of Encinitas, Vice Chair Blakespear?
Wait. I'm sorry. We need
I'm
to back
sorry.
up.
Okay.
I need everyone to mute their microphones except for the chair and who she calls on for their vote. Delmar's vote is not registered there yet. And then we need to go to El Cajon.
Just for the record, I'm going to restate. The City of Del Mar, Mayor Haviland voted no. City of El Cajon, Mayor Wells voted yes. And the next vote will be City of Encinitas, Vice Chair Blakespear.
No.
City of Escondido, Mayor McNamara.
Yes.
City of Imperial Beach, Councilmember West.
No.
City of La Mesa, Councilmember Baber.
No.
City of Lemon Grove, Councilmember Mendoza.
No.
City of National City, Mayor Sotelo Solis.
Sotelo Solis, no.
City of Oceanside, Deputy Mayor Feller.
Yes.
City of Poway, Chair Voss.
Yes.
City of San Diego, Mayor Moreno.
It's council member, but no.
Oh, I apologize. Councilmember Moreno, I didn't hear your vote.
Moreno, no.
Thank you. City of San Marcos, Mayor Jones.
Yes.
City of Santee, Mayor Mento.
No.
City of Solana Beach, Councilmember Zito.
Zito, no.
They're the family.
City of Vista, Mayor Ritter.
Yes.
Salas,
And go
no.
back to,
So, what's the rats that
and
we saw out there? Is it
City of
just
Chula
like
Vista,
nuts?
Mayor Salas is a no.
Salas, no.
It's mash. The top is mash. Okay. So,
The motion does not pass.
Procedurally, do we need Councilmember Moreno to make a motion again, or do we go direct to the original motion?
It remains on the floor and it's now appropriate for a vote.
Thank you. Francesca, would you please call the roll call?
Thank you. For the City of Carlsbad, Mayor Pro Tem Blackburn.
No.
the fermentation happens pretty quick, and it'll get hot in there because those gases are all coming.
Please mute your microphone.
City of Chula Vista, Mayor Salas.
Salas, aye.
So what happens with that layer? Do you turn that into something
City of
else?
Coronado, Mayor Bailey.
Oh.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. Can you repeat, Mayor Bailey?
Bailey, yes.
Thank you. City of Del Mar, Mayor Haviland.
Haviland, yes.
City of El Cajon, Mayor Wells. Oh, I apologize. San Diego County Supervisor Desmond.
No, for Supervisor Desmond.
Thank you. City of El Cajon, Mayor Wells.
No.
City of Encinitas, Vice Chair Blakespear.
Yes.
City of Escondido, Mayor McNamara.
Yes.
City of Imperial Beach, Councilmember West.
Yes.
City of La Mesa, Councilmember Baber.
Yes.
City of Lemon Grove, Councilmember Mendoza.
Yes.
City of National City, Mayor Sotelo Solis.
Sotelo Solis, aye.
City of Oceanside, Deputy Mayor Feller.
No.
City of Poway, Chair Voss.
Yes.
City of San Diego, Councilmember Moreno.
Moreno, yes.
City of San Marcos, Mayor Jones.
No.
City of Santee, Mayor Mento.
Yes.
City of Solana Beach, Councilmember Zito.
Zito, yes.
City of Vista, Mayor Ritter.
No.
Thank you. And that motion passes.
Thank you. I want to thank everyone for your input today. It has been a robust discussion. I think what's clear is we all want what's best for this agency and to regain the trust of the public. That concludes our agenda. Our next meeting will be Friday, September 25th at 9 a.m. We are adjourned.